Okay. You're getting back online here. Okay. Well, we appreciate you spending some time this morning with the Building Industry Coalition. This is a group of people in the building industry, the regional building industry, and includes AGC East Tennessee, AIA Chattanooga, Chattanooga Home Builders Association, Green Spaces, and Construction Specifications Institute. And, you know, we all have our own particular area of focus, but a lot of what we do, we have overlapping policy issues and legislative issues. And so from time to time, we'll work together for the benefit of our collective memberships. But today, we're just going to ask you a few questions, each of the representatives from the groups, and over 30 minutes. And if any of our viewers would like to ask some questions, please put that in the chat. And if we have time, we'll get to those as well. So as you know, I'm Leslie Gower, and with AGC East Tennessee, we represent the commercial construction industry. And as we start off, I'd just like for you to, if you wouldn't mind, just sharing some of your top priorities if elected mayor.
Sure. Well, you know, the story of my life in this county, from going to one of our great elementary schools on Big Ridge to going off to UT and having the opportunity to be in my early 20s, kind of the younger brother to the Access America lamppost guys in my late 20s, becoming their business partner, even into my 30s, being a public school parent myself and a member of the Board of Regents. Education in our community has fascinated me, at times disappointed me, at times served me well. And I still think, all in all, the reflection of a community is really in the quality of its public school system. And, you know, it's been described to me by some CEOs in our community who are relatively new to town that we kind of drag our public school system around like an anchor, despite the fact that we've got a reputation as one of the great mid-sized communities in the country. We've achieved that, and the perception of that, despite the fact that for people in wide swaths of our county, it's very difficult to expect the public school system to deliver you either into college or into preparedness to work. And I believe the highest calling of the next county mayor would be to take on public education head on. It's the one issue, not only is it nearly 2/3 of the county budget, but it affects nearly everything else. It's an issue that is probably even bigger than a superintendent of schools can address. And as we get it right, it affects crime, it affects our workforce. It certainly, and I learned this in 10 years of very intense experience in the business community, it certainly impacts our ability to develop a great economy. And so you get all these different tentacles of public education. In a lot of ways, I think in my lifetime as a 35-year-old, public education is the elephant in the room. If you live again in one of the right pockets of the county, you're okay. For many of us, though, we just kind of live with the unusual traditions of public and private education here. And I make no bones about the fact that I'm running because I think the job of county mayor, first of all, is misunderstood. It doesn't come with a whole lot of unilateral power. It's a leadership position. Tennessee state law describes it as a financial position and a leadership position by virtue of that budget that you author every year. Like I said, 64% of it is public education. And then the question becomes, what do we expect our next county mayor to do? We've set different parameters than any of the other candidates have in terms of our service. And I mean that both in terms of time, and then I think the ambitiousness of our proposals. We've committed to do this for 8 years, and we've laid out the proposals that we want to put in motion that we think would make a big difference. And there's certainly an emphasis on education and career training in terms of both our proposals and the motivations that we had to run as parents here who've got a whole lot of skin in the game in the future of the county.
I think you're alluding to this a little bit, but the construction industry is in the middle of a dire workforce crisis, and Mayor Coppinger has done an exemplary job of leadership in helping us launch the Construction Career Center. What would your plan be to help us further those efforts to help us with our workforce.
Yeah. Well, Leslie, in limited ways, I got to play a role there. Certainly was an advocate at the Board of Regents level. I think people will see in time that it is TCAT Chattanooga and the Board of Regents system that in many ways will allow that place to operate and enable it to operate at a very high level. We run basically 100 different facilities across the state. I challenge people that if you've gotten so cynical about government that you don't know if it can work well, come to a technical college, which effectively the construction trade center is going to operate like a technical college. Come and look at one of them, see how it works. It is fundamentally different, frankly, even than a public school. How would I like to influence it? I think one of the shames of our public school system, as big and diverse as it is that there's only one true vocational school, soon to be two. But if you want to go be a welder at Sequoia, they're over capacity. We're about to actually expand some of the equipment that'll allow us to take more students on there. But in a county that's 40 plus miles south to north, we ought to run at least 3 true vocational schools. I mean, my whole life I grew up with stories about the shame of closing Kirkman down. I think everybody ought to have the opportunity to pursue a path that will deliver them into a career at 18, 19, 20 years old. 4-year path isn't for everybody. In fact, one of the real passions of my life, it's the reason that I want to serve on the Board of Regents, is that I think the broken K-12 model is gone so far awry that we're now setting students up for failure, because so many students we know at 3rd grade aren't reading at grade level. We leave them in the cookie cutter model. That leads to great hopelessness. It leads to high dropout numbers, and then it doesn't serve our economy well. So it's really a lose-lose situation. Hopeless students end up perpetuating crime. And then even as we look at our workforce and economic development opportunities, we've shot ourselves in the foot because we haven't invested. And in order to do this, we got to aggressively push back on the stigma. So I've talked about, I spoke to Loftus Middle School last week. I was invited to speak to the whole Loftus community, about 900 parents and grandparents and teachers and students. And it occurred to me that it's probably, as I was sitting there preparing to talk to them about leadership issues, it's in that kind of 8th to 9th grade juncture where I think a county mayor is the exact right person to aggressively begin pushing back on the stigma that a career training path, whether it's in the skilled trades or whether it's on a different type of vocational path. People say you're not supposed to use the term vocational education anymore. That's what I'm told in the kind of world of higher education. I couldn't disagree more. I think we ought to more broadly define vocational education as preparing yourself for a life of work. And if we'll do that in our community, we're really perfectly positioned to do it because we're in the only state in America that has free 2-year college. So the more of our students we put onto a technical college or a community college path, they're not going to have any student loan debt as a result. It's really a tremendous opportunity for us in Southeast Tennessee to begin reprioritizing career training and being prepared for adulthood over putting everybody on the 4-year track.
Thank you for that. And also thank you for your support on the Construction Career Center. And so all these great strides are being made to recruit business to Hamilton County, and yet our housing inventory for the workforce is financially restrictive and getting more so by the day. So what can Hamilton County government do to create more affordable workforce housing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, one of the problems in having the first county mayor's race in 30 years, or one of the challenges of it, is that very few people have thought a lot about the role of a county mayor, both the powers and the limitations therein. And so we're often asked questions that are probably significantly outside the purview of the job of county mayor. Not that this one entirely is, but I think when you begin to think about housing and even some infrastructure questions, they are either outside of the direct purview of a county mayor or close. But, I think we've got to have some serious conversations. Those in the political class in our community have kicked the can down the road for a long time. And so I think we're going to have to get creative about higher density opportunities, but we're going to have to consider it in parts of the community where there's already a lot of resistance, and rightfully so, to development, because we in some parts of the community have got gotten ahead of our skis. And, local government is where you can't operate in the clouds. In Washington, you can sort of always be posturing to where you never have to be for anything. You can only be against it. I think a lot of our county commissioners, frankly, are good at a similar strategy. I'd say it's kind of the distinguishing leadership characteristic of Mayor Coppinger compared to a lot of our county commissioners, is that he was willing to be for some things, even when they're extremely unpopular. It's ironic to me to hear county commissioners talk about kicking the can down the road, or how politicians have when they in fact have done that. And so I could envision. I think it's part of the long-term vision that Mayor Coppinger has, that the McDonald site up north could be a reimagining of what both industrial development looks like, but also residential. And I guess one of the opportunities where we really could take a novel approach to land development, and we end up with a community there that serves the whole north end of the county well. There could be, I think, agriculture opportunities there. There could be recreational opportunities, industrial ones and residential ones. But I'm frankly, to be clear, even on that project, I am very transparent with voters in the north part of the county that I only intend to serve 8 years, and I'm not sure that there will be industrial development on that site in the next 8 years, but I think there definitely will be critical planning that goes on.
And speaking of sites, how do you feel about the relocation of the Lookout Stadium?
I'm on the record. I think I'm probably the first citizen that I know of who spoke up. 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote an op-ed, just at least casting doubt on the very dubious economics of minor league baseball stadiums. And so I have a hard time being intellectually honest and changing perspectives. I understand there are a lot of influential community members who support a baseball stadium being built. I would say is the background in early stage venture capital, understanding quite a bit about baseball. I'm a baseball fan myself. The economics of minor league baseball stadiums is, again, dubious at best. I would, a few things since you asked. This is actually an area of kind of great passion for me. One, there's a few things that our community just needs to be aware of. If we're going to be really serious about $86 million, at least 70 of which appears to be public financing of one sort or another, we need to come to grips with a few realities. One is we don't have a bond rating for, and this is true, the city isn't in the school business anymore, but so from the county's perspective, it's not like we have a bond rating for schools and for other projects. You are in effect robbing Peter to pay Paul. So I think we have to look at a stadium as taking away from an opportunity to either invest in schools or build a new school. That's one thing. Two, we need to be eyes wide open about the economics at play for the owners of the team. Okay. And I say this, the main ownership group of the team is a private equity style fund. And you get a return on that investment, not because minor league baseball teams are cash cows. They are not. Your asset will increase in value over time, particularly if you can convince political leaders in your town to build a stadium. Okay. And so there's no question that what they would like to do is get a stadium built and then look for an exit opportunity in the years to follow. And then the last one, I think this one's important, and I've said this to almost all parties involved, is before you could get me supportive, you're going to have to make a case to the adjacent community, which is largely African-American and increasingly Latino, that a massive generational public investment is in their best interest. I've not heard a good argument as to why this would be in the best interest of the Alton Park community.
Thank you. I am going to pass the mic over to Josh Rudison.
Morning, Weston. I'm Josh Rudison. I'm with AIA Chattanooga. You had spoke pretty passionately about education, and I was wondering how your administration might address the failing infrastructure of our current school building stock.
Yeah. Well, most of our failing structures, as you probably know, are in the city of Chattanooga. And frankly, a lot of the challenges that we have in public education in our most failing schools are also in the city of Chattanooga. And, one thing I'd like to do from day one is sit down with Mayor Kelly and get a feeling for just how aggressively the city of Chattanooga is willing to be a partner in public education. And then secondly, in a low interest rate environment, I think we ought to take advantage of the fact that we have had leadership in this county that's been good stewards, and we ought to aggressively bond fund a modernization of the physical footprint of our system. I don't think it's realistic or fair to expect our children to learn in facilities that are not commensurate with the quality of education that we intend to provide. And so I think it's a big deal. But I think that's a broader conversation. I think, it's in facilities that the county mayor does have an appropriate and significant role. And as we reimagine those, I think we also ought to think long and hard and towards the future about what's taught within those walls. And, for example, on the campus of Chattanooga State, we run a STEM school that is a Hamilton County public school. It's maybe the single most impressive success story of our system in the last decade. Why do we have one STEM school? I would love a future as we go and modernize facilities where there is geographically accessible a STEM school everywhere, in the same way that I'd like for there to be geographically accessible true vocational schools. We've made some important strides in the district being open enrollment. It's like the entire district should be open enrollment in the fall. It's shocking to me how few of our citizens realize that, and the potentially profound impacts of parents being able to steer their children towards good schools or away from failing schools. So it's kind of top priority of mine running, that we would be thoughtful, but also very aggressive in bringing our facilities up to the level of quality that we want the education provided to be. I think it not only speaks to parents, I think it speaks even to teachers, right? Do teachers want to go and teach in one of our great modern facilities, or do they want to go teach in a dilapidated facility? And increasingly, we're going to see that these facilities are problematic as we go open enrollment, because you're going to see more and more parents choose to avoid the failing facilities.
Yeah, I do believe that will be problematic, which is one of the reasons why asking that question, to hopefully address some of that. So outside of school, we would like to see kids have a place to go. What's your stance on the county's recent parks master plan, and how would you expand access to current public space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, our biggest challenges in terms of where students go after school in this community is certainly within the city of Chattanooga. And so this is one of the, just many issues where the city and county mayor need to be working together. And there are so many opportunities, short of the city taking schools back over, for the city and the county to be thoughtful in working together. Brian Johnson and I had conversations about this actually during the city mayor's race. I remember taking him to lunch and asking him, what does a great city mayor look like from the perspective of a school superintendent who doesn't necessarily have a direct working role with the city mayor? And he made the point that there is nothing limiting the city of Chattanooga from engaging. And you've seen this in the early months of the Kelly administration, that there's an intentionality about having some people from city government in the buildings in our communities where there are the biggest challenges. And I think from a recreation perspective, the county's kind of taking some time off, it seems like, and there are some opportunities across the county for us to reinvest. One of them is up sort of in the neck of the woods where I grew up. I think there's probably a phenomenal opportunity for us to take some cues from what Ray County's done and expand access to world-class fishing. It's the kind of project that could have, I think, tremendous impact on young people and them having access to waterways in our community that they may not even realize are world-class. I often have been interested, we live in such a big, diverse place, and our school system is the best way to understand it in a lot of ways, suburban, urban, and rural. And you'll meet kids, if you go look for them in the inner city, who've never seen our big blue bridges. You'll meet kids from the country who may be the same way. And I wonder, how many kids who grow up in the Tyner community realize that there's just a few miles up the road, exceptional outdoor opportunities in a variety of different ways. But I do think fishing is a unique one where there's an opportunity for us to do some economic development, some tourism development, but also open up opportunities for students.
I appreciate your answers. That's all I have.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks.
Chris?
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning, Weston. Appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us today.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, my name's Chris Mabee. I'm here today representing the Home Builders Association of Greater Chattanooga. Wanted to ask you today about a policy that we feel has had a negative side effect for many communities across America, and that's the implementation of impact fees. Many small or some local governments view it as an immediate fix to infrastructure related problems.
Yeah.
But the truth is it often hurts the consumer. As with any cost, it's ultimately passed down to the consumer and results in higher housing prices. So wanted to get your thoughts on that and ask you as mayor, what your stance would be on impact fees.
Yeah. Well, if you go to Williamson County, you'll get, one review. You go to Knox County, you'll get another review. I'm not inclined to think that impact fees are the answer. However, our county has not planned for the future very well. Now, I think there's a plausible scenario where some of our wastewater infrastructure challenges are going to be addressed because we had, kind of a once in a blue moon windfall of cash from Washington that may very well bail out anybody locally having to make hard decisions, and we can kind of put a Band-Aid on the situation for the foreseeable future. So I don't think impact fees are necessary. And certainly before you consider it, there ought to be sort of a high bar in terms of the type of growth that a specific community is seeing. But I also am sensitive to, I'm married into an Ooltewah Collegedale family, just in the 9 years that Shelby and I've been married, 10 years that I've spent a lot of time out in Ooltewah, relatively speaking, as a guy who grew up on the other side of the river. There's I think got to be a different approach moving forward from county government in terms of new development than there's ever been. And this is no novel statement. It's just that, for the first time ever, so much of your new development is taking place in unincorporated parts of the community where county government is the only government. And these are things ultimately the county mayor can have an opinion on, but doesn't have a vote on the county commission. Gets to appoint folks to the planning commission. And I think there's an opportunity for there to be some new thinkers as we come up on some real needs for long-term planning. But categorically speaking, not a believer that fees that are inevitably going to be passed on to homeowners is a silver bullet of any kind.
I appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you, Weston. Leslie, that's all I had.
Jimmy?
Weston, I'm Jimmy Lael, and I'm representing the Construction Specification Institute. And our question is, with the growth of Hamilton County, or the growth that Hamilton County has experienced over the past decades, what experiences do you bring to this role that will give confidence to the voters that we can properly manage additional growth that we know is coming to Hamilton County?
Yeah, well, I have told folks during this campaign that, by virtue of being 35 years old, I don't have the longest career arc, not the longest runway of anybody who's ever run for office around here. We are somewhat notorious, actually, in this county for our quite senior political class. Most parts of the state have term limits that prevent the other big communities in our state have term limits. And so it's not as unusual for a parent age person to run for office. So if there are limitations on my resume, they may just be in sheer volume, because I think the experience that I've had in the business world is probably the most diverse and in many ways high level. I just got on an accelerated path in my early 20s by virtue of the companies that I was doing business with and the entrepreneurs that I was in business with. I was exposed to a lot early and have moved fast and have had kind of a tremendous amount of both exposure and experience in selling our community and being a part of planning what the future of our community looks like. I was in my mid-20s beginning to be involved in negotiations and conversations around companies that were considering growing here, considering companies that were considering relocating here. And it's one of the reasons why I bring almost all these conversations back to education, Jimmy, because we, when we talk about planning for the future of the county, we already live in an environment where, when you think of the most identifiable leaders of our community, the vast majority of them, in some cases at an embarrassing rate, have no experience, no firsthand experience in the public school system. And so I actually think when we begin thinking about, the future of our county, I fear, to be frank with you, that we've hit the ceiling. This may very well, without major reforms in public education, this may be as good as it ever gets. I mean, I think you can project out economic growth in any part of the country that's not run by kind of real sort of degenerate politicians. There's going to be some baseline growth. I'm not sure that the next 10, 15, 20 years in this community is as great as some people say it is if public education continues at its same clip. I mean, 60% of the graduates of our public high schools aren't ready for work or college. And I would argue, from a crime perspective, from a workforce development perspective, that is not sustainable. And while we for sure have infrastructure issues, we've got some residential planning issues. Our biggest challenge is that we are not proficient in preparing our young people for adulthood.
Thank you.
Wayne?
Good morning, Weston. My name is Wayne Brown, and I'm representing Green Spaces today. Tennessee residents pay some of the lowest electric rates in the country. However, we have some of the highest bills, and some of our low-income families are paying hundreds of dollars per month. As county mayor, what has been your experience with energy efficiency? And if you would share with us some of your strategies on addressing energy efficiency in homes, businesses, and our government buildings.
Yeah, some of this is when I often describe. Yeah, can I just have 3 minutes? Okay. I'm sorry, 3 minutes. Yeah, I think this is one of these areas where the job of county mayor can be misunderstood. It is really a leadership position. And I think the question you ask here is a great example of how a county mayor can be a real effective leader across the board in ways that you might not even envision, right? I mean, I described earlier how I'd like to be a hands-on county mayor in combating stigmas about not pursuing a four-year education. Same kind of situation here, where you've got in large part, in parts of our community where people can afford massive power bills the least, a lack of education, lack of understanding about why that is. My uncle, Johnny Watts, if there's ever been a greater name for an electrician, I haven't heard it. Johnny Watts has been one of the people who leads education efforts on behalf of EPB. I've built 2 energy efficient homes for myself, that meet all the kind of modern certifications. So I do have, I think a pretty well-rounded appreciation for what it means to build in a modern way that prevents both waste, but in both an energy and a financial sense. And, when you've got a county mayor, when it comes to facilities, who has a working understanding of what the merits of building in an energy efficient manner are, I think it'll pay dividends across the board.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We did get one question for you through the chat. which says a previous candidate mentioned that educational funding comes from the county, and this might be a means of influencing curriculum from the county mayor's office. Are you supportive of this strategy for improving school outcomes?
Am I supportive of, say that part again?
Are you supportive of this strategy for improving school outcomes?
I don't really understand the approving school outcomes. I think there's a fine line here. There's no question that under Tennessee state law, the county mayor is meant to be involved in public education in a county like ours, where there's only one taxing authority and it's county government. School board doesn't have taxing authority. The county mayor is the fiscal agent of the county. The county mayor should lead and should make sure that we are being good stewards of taxpayer dollars in the largest institution within county government, which is public education. Should you use that leverage or abuse it to determine what exactly is being taught in the classroom? Not except for in extenuating circumstances. Does not sound appropriate. I'm the only person running with any background in education, and that's background as a parent and as a member of the Board of Regents. But even I don't feel qualified to go and tell second grade teachers what they ought to be doing to teach students. I think it's more at a macro level where a county mayor should, through facilities, through long-term planning, set priorities in the public school system that are congruent with and match up with what industry is doing and the type of economy that we're trying to develop.
Well, I think that's it. I think you're out of the hot seat now, Weston.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks to all of our viewers who sat in on it. And we will be, again, sending out the recording to our memberships. And that is a wrap. Thanks, everybody, for participating.
Thanks, Leslie.
See you later.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.